I'm Alice Loxton and I present documentaries over on History Hit TV. If you're passionate about all things history, sign up to History Hit TV. It's like Netflix but just for history. We've got hours of ad-free documentaries about all aspects of the past. You can get a huge discount from History Hit TV. Make sure you check out the details below and use the code ABSOLUTEHISTORY, all one word, when you sign up. Now, on with the show.
San Miguel de Allende in central Mexico is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and for good reason. It has a colorful history and even more colorful art and architecture everywhere you look. This bellísima ciudad has so much to be curious about. Here's what I'm curious about in San Miguel de Allende. Where did the town get its name, and why did it change? And what does this little doggy have to do with it? Why are there so many big, beautiful mansions in one small town? What does the family who lived here have to do with this church and this art school? Who built this incredible pink church, and what do postcards have to do with it? What about this yellow domed church, and why is there an art school here? And this church, what is it doing out here in the middle of the desert? What is so important about the colors of these textiles? And why is there so much art, art, art? It is time to get curious about San Miguel de Allende, Mexico. This UNESCO World Heritage town is chock full of Mexican Baroque architecture, with the gorgeous El Jardín right in the center of town. At the corner of El Jardín, you will always see the same two men, standing in the same spot, keeping watch over their city. This is the perfect spot to talk about how the town got its name. Originally, it was just called San Miguel, for Juan de San Miguel, one of the original settlers here. Later, General Ignacio de Allende was born here, and of course became a very important military figure during the Mexican War of Independence. So we have San Miguel de Allende, San Miguel de Allende, come together to the beautiful town of San Miguel de Allende. And as we will learn, it is a town built on silver, textiles, religion, lots and lots of art, and some very turbulent times. San Miguel's city palace is one of the most important locations to the town's history, as well as to the entire history of Mexico. That's because in 1810, this is where the very first city council meeting of an independent Mexico was held. But before that historic meeting, the legendary Grito, or Call for Independence, happened in the nearby town of Dolores Hidalgo. Father Miguel Hidalgo was a Mexican independence leader, and he stood at this church and called for the end to Spain's rule.
Hidalgo gives the cry of independence right here, the Grito, and it happened on the 16th of September of 1810 at 5 o'clock in the morning. Everybody was like very surprised what was going on here because it was not the time to ring the bells. He convinced them in 20 minutes to follow him against the Spaniards.
And this began the Mexican War of Independence, a revolution against the Spanish colonialists by the indigenous peoples. As we've learned, after the revolution, the town was renamed in honor of hometown hero General Ignacio Allende. But before the town's name was changed to San Miguel de Allende, it was San Miguel something else entirely. And to find out what that something else was, we go up a hill to fetch a pail of water at this fountain that happens to have a curious little doggy on it. We have a fountain, we have a dog, and we have some art. What do those three things do to come together at this particular site?
Yes, we're located at a very popular place in town called El Chorro. Chorro means springs.
Ah, okay.
So when the Spaniards came into this area, they built the church of San Miguel Viejo, and then they had a war against the indigenous Chichimecas. They couldn't win the war, so they decided to move and explore the area, and this is where the dog comes up. It's a Mexican kind of dog called Xorescuincle.
Okay.
They found water in this specific spot, and they moved the town to this area.
And you can see on that fountain the indigenous name of the town. It's Guinapan, meaning place of dogs or water of dogs. But not just any dog, the Mexican hairless dog. Okay, I know what you're thinking. At first glance, the Xolo Squintly, or Xolo, isn't going to win any beauty contests anytime soon. But the Xolo is a rare, ancient, and revered breed. In fact, the Aztecs believed the Xolo had near godlike powers and carried human souls into the afterlife. Even legendary Mexican artist Diego Rivera loved these little bald guys. And above this fountain dedicated to a dog is La Casa de la Cultura, dedicated to art, which we will soon see is a very big deal here in San Miguel de Allende. But first, back to that name. The San Miguel in San Miguel de Allende, as we've learned, is named after this monk. But the name also comes from the patron saint of the town, the Archangel Miguel, or Michael. And he has a pretty important building named after him here. So for that, we go back down the hill to the center of town. The symbol of the town is the beautiful and pink Church of San Miguel. It is so tall that you can see it from just about any spot in the city. The architectural style is a little bit Gothic, a little bit Moorish, and a whole lot pink. Why is the style so eclectic? Well, legend has it that the designer collected postcards of all around Europe's most beautiful churches, kind of mushed them all together, and then created this. But what you see here is not the original version of the church.
If you go inside, you'll find something completely different. It's a church from the 18th century with the classical church that were done by the Spaniards here in Mexico. But then in 1880, a local worker, his name was Seferino Gutierrez, just a builder, he got an idea from postcards from Europe, like the Cologne, like the cathedral in Cologne, like Vienna, like Switzerland. So he designed this style that we call it Neo-Gothic. They put down the two main towers and built the front part that was completed in 1898.
So a local self-taught stonemason is responsible for this towering beauty, an eclectic beauty, but a beauty nonetheless.
If you look in the side, there's palm trees that they don't match with the rest of the city. Then in the back we have a clock. That tower also he did it. It was different. So he changed all the style of the city. And now that's why it's become such an important place, and it's part of why we're a World Heritage City designated by UNESCO in 2008.
But the Parroquia de San Miguel Archangel isn't the only important church in town, and to get to the other, we have some pretty lofty archways to cross under. As you stroll through town, you will notice how high the covered archways are here. Why are they there? Well, this also was copied from European street plans from centuries ago, back when they had to be tall enough for horses and carriages. And this town might be one of the few that can still make use of those high-as-a-horse covered walkways. And just around the corner from this walkway is row after row of beautiful big mansions. Why so many mansions? Because of a royal road.
We're part of the Camino Real de Tierra Adentro, which is this road that comes from Mexico City all the way to Española and the north part of Santa Fe, New Mexico. And this is where all the mining towns were. We have Guanajuato, Osos, then going north, Zacatecas, and the owners of the mines used to live in San Miguel. That's why the big homes we have here in the town, they used to work in the mines close by, but now it's a World Heritage Road, El Camino Real, that is the main part of all the history of the mining that was taken first to Spain and then north to the States.
The Royal Road, or El Camino Real, connected regions of New Spain from the late 16th to the late 19th centuries. But where is New Spain? Well, it used to stretch all the way south into South America and all the way north across the United States. And one of the wealthiest men of New Spain was Manuel Tomás de la Canal. He built his home here in 1732. His family becomes one of the most wealthy and influential in San Miguel's history. The eagle over the doorway represents the public posts held by the family. And this is the statue of the Virgin of Loreto, the patroness of the family village. On either side of the statue are the family's coats of arms. The De la Canal family contributed much to the town, building houses, churches, roads, even the water system. They also supported the local textile industry, which San Miguel is still known for today. And there is one more very important contribution that the family made. This beautiful church. One of the De la Canal children became a nun, and she was the one to help build this church, all for her beloved hometown. So let's get curious about this church founded by the fanciest family of the town. This is the Church of the Immaculate Conception, built between 1755 and 1842. The dome was added in 1891, modeled after the Church of Les Invalides in Paris. And guess who designed it? Our friend Zeferino Gutierrez of Pink Church and Postcard fame. And connected to the church is the convent, but instead of nuns in their habits strolling about the cloisters, today we have art lovers roaming the halls and gardens, a sort of church of art. But why did this space go from a convent to an art school? Well, it goes back to the 1850s and the Lerdo Law, which sought to break up the wealth of the Catholic Church and private estates. While the church itself was allowed to remain a church, its adjoining properties had to be given to the government for secular use. So this former convent becomes many things, including an elementary school, and then in the 1930s, an art school. And thus begins the legacy of San Miguel de Allende as an art colony. From Spanish colony to art colony, San Miguel de Allende has a beautiful art history. In modern times, it began after World War II when U.S. soldiers were studying on the GI Bill. Art students from the U.S. and also art students from around the world were attracted to this very artsy city. Now, just a few generations later, and there is literally art everywhere you look. Thousands of artists from across the globe flock to San Miguel to practice their art in the many galleries and studios here. One of the best is Fabrica La Aurora, a converted textile factory full of talented artists. Why do you choose to create your art here in San Miguel de Allende?
Well, I grew up in Mexico City, and there was a moment when I needed to move somewhere else. And I had known San Miguel already in my teenagehood. And what I loved about San Miguel was the fact that artists are welcome, that women living alone are welcome, and that I was able to find a place where I could build my own studio because I work with glass, and glass requires a lot of equipment.
That's amazing. So you're obviously practicing your art and creating your art amongst a community of other artists, which is a completely different environment than maybe somebody who's maybe doing book illustration out of their own home. Why is it better for you as an artist to be amongst other artists here?
Well, we help each other, we feed from each other. I've taken several workshops here with really good artists. This began in the 50s, with 60s actually, with the GI Bill. People started coming and they started to create art in the Instituto. There were fantastic teachers, and then Bellisartes began too. It was very organic, just like the Aurora factory. The beginnings were organic and then they just developed.
So just sort of by word of mouth, people, were telling other artist friends from in America or in other places around the globe, this is the place to be.
Mm-hmm. And it continues to be like that.
And it all began here at Bellisartes. The first director of Bellisartes was an American artist named Sterling Dickinson. Born in Chicago, he served in the U.S. military. He moved to San Miguel in the 1930s and, for the rest of his life, worked actively to recruit hundreds of former servicemen and women on the GI Bill to study art here in San Miguel. Sterling was and is loved by the people of San Miguel. He remains the only American to ever receive the title of favored adopted son. Sterling Dickinson even wrote a few books about his travels and experiences in his beloved Mexico. And back here in his even more beloved San Miguel de Allende, he and his fellow artists founded a new art school in 1951, the Instituto Allende, which, as you can see, is still thriving today. And wouldn't you know it, the Instituto Allende also has a connection back to the De la Canal family. This used to be the family's country estate built in 1736. you can still see a remnant of their home here with the family patroness, the Virgin of Loreto, above the doorway.
Here we are less than half a mile far. This was out in the country.
In the middle of nowhere.
Exactly. This was the ranch.
Yeah.
Their country house. Then it was a very nice building for many years, and after the independence movement, it became kind of abandoned, and they opened the art school in 1951.
And because of Sterling Dickinson and other artists' influence, the demographics of San Miguel changed forever.
That's why people start moving into town, and now we have 12,000 foreigners living in San Miguel. So this is where this history begins in San Miguel.
And when all those artists flocked here, they continued the legacy of mural painting and the heritage of those beautiful San Miguel handmade textiles. Remember how the Camino Real, the Royal Road, contributed to the wealth of San Miguel? Well, it's also the reason for the booming textile industry. As travelers came through on their way back and forth to the silver mines, they needed clothing and blankets, so locals began making them. This artist here at Instituto Allende carries on that tradition with these yarns dyed in the same plant, flower, and cacti used for centuries. And some of these colors are so special you wouldn't believe the lengths that the textile industry goes to just to keep these colors authentic.
There is a big ranch where they just have the cactus for the cochinilla.
They just grow that just for that.
Distribuyen aquí, la compra creo que toda China.
And now they sell it to China.
Of course. And this artist also says that some of these colors are so traditional that they are the same colors used on cave paintings found in the area. From ancient cave paintings to the modern-day runway, here at an uber-chic fashion show held in the heart of San Miguel, where local designers are still using the traditional fabrics of the town. But back to the Instituto. In the back, there is a curious little chapel. Some believe the chapel was built for the De la Canal's daughter, the nun, but it may have been built for another curious reason altogether.
In the back of this chapel, there is a little archaeological site. So when the Spaniards came, they always built a church in front of an archaeological site.
When you find an archaeological site, to build a chapel right there?
Yes, when the Spaniards came to Mexico, they wanted to convert all the indigenous into Catholicism. That's why they always built a church. If you go to Mexico City, the main cathedral is in top of the old Tenochtitlan. So this is the same what happened in old Mexico. In Puebla, you'll find a church in top of the largest pyramid in Cholula. So that's pretty normal in Mexico.
And at this particular site, archaeologists found pre-Hispanic ceramics and bodies believed to be from the Toltec and Chichimeca cultures from around the 10th to the 12th centuries. Wow, how curious is that? Next, from one curious church to another, we now take a quick side trip outside San Miguel de Allende, a trip that some call a pilgrimage. Part of what makes San Miguel de Allende a UNESCO World Heritage Site isn't in San Miguel at all. It's about 7 miles away, and it takes a really, really long time to walk here. But why would anyone walk that far, especially out into the desert? Because this is the sanctuary of Atotonilco, which is an indigenous word meaning place of the hot waters. A local priest and native of San Miguel named Father Alfaro established this church here in the 18th century for a very curious reason. So why build a beautiful church like this in the middle of a desert? Well, the story goes that Father Alfaro came here for the healing waters of the hot springs. Once he fell asleep under a tree, he had a religious vision that told him to build his church here. And those hot springs were believed to have healing powers for centuries for the indigenous peoples long before Christianity came to the region. And this desert location reminded believers of something else, too. There's a comparison to this sort of being the new Holy Land, the new Jerusalem for Mexico.
Oh, yeah, good point. Yeah, he said that this was compared with the Temple of Solomon and San Miguel being Jerusalem. So, yeah, it's a very interesting point because that represents how holy it was for him.
But there was also a more practical reason why this spot was chosen.
Camino Real de Tierra Adentro, this was the royal road of inland. So it was connected through the road and through the fact that the silver and the gold was passing here constantly.
That's right, that same Camino Real, or Royal Road, that helped to build the town of San Miguel de Allende and those lavish mansions came right through here as well. You know, throughout history, no matter what was going on, it was whatever the goods and services were. If you create a trail, you're going to have towns, you need places for people to live, you need water to drink, and you need churches, and this came out of that.
Exactly. It's like you mentioned before, the Silk Road. They needed to control the crime because silver and gold produces a lot of
greed,
yes,
and a lot of crime.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So they called the churches, they called the Franciscans, they called the Dominicans, they called the Augustines, they called the Jesuits, and they made all these beautiful churches.
And beautiful it is. It is one of the finest examples of Baroque art in New Spain, the perfect blend of European and Latin American influences. And oh, that artwork inside. These paintings took more than 30 years to complete. Styles are everything from Mexican Baroque to Indigenous to Flemish to Spanish. There's barely a corner left unpainted. Some images are beautiful and serene, others downright creepy. All are powerful. The overall effect has been compared to the Sistine Chapel.
I will describe it more than that as the masterpiece of the Baroque mestizo art in Mexico. Sistine Chapel is a little bit exaggerated because the Sistine Chapel is huge.
Yeah.
But it's really a masterpiece.
And this inspirational artwork is the last thing true believers see before they embark upon a very special journey between the sanctuary and San Miguel. Every year, at the beginning of the Easter season, crowds of people gather here at midnight to take part in the Lord of the Column pilgrimage. Together, they walk the 7 miles to town in the dark, arriving at dawn. Why? Well, this tradition began in the early 1800s, when it was believed that the act of delivering this statue miraculously wiped out an epidemic in San Miguel. So, the tradition continues to this day to forever protect the town. So, from a town named after 2 important leaders, whose spot was chosen by an important dog, and later decorated by Spanish colonial architecture, and lots of paintings by artists from around the world. To this pink church dedicated to the town's other Miguel, to this yellow church dedicated to the Virgin Mary, with its adjoining cloister made possible by a local nun, who happened to be a member of a wealthy noble family who lived here and here. With neighbors in even more beautiful mansions built on the wealth of nearby silver mines, which gave us the Camino Real, or King's Highway, to transport all that silver. Which leads us to this sanctuary in the middle of the desert that some believe to be the New Jerusalem, and to this tiny town that had a huge impact with one man's cry for independence. And we can't forget the enduring legacy of a beloved American artist who began an art colony that continues to attract artists from around the world. San Miguel de Allende has so much to be curious about. Thank you for joining us on our educational journey, and hopefully now you're even more curious about the who, what, where, why, when, and how of San Miguel de Allende. As they say here in Mexico, te veo pronto!